is some of the history that goes into it. And people say, well, why is history important? You're talking about advocacy. And I personally feel that studying the past is necessary so that we avoid, hopefully, making some of the same mistakes. George Santayana famously said at the beginning of the 20th century, those who do not study the past are condemned to repeat it. So advocacy is a concept that's been around with us for a long, long time. We first, as far as I know, the first appearance of the concept is actually several thousand years ago in Proverbs. Speak out on behalf of the voiceless and for the rights of all that are vulnerable. Speak out and judge rightly so that you may defend the rights of the needy and the poor. So again, it's been a concept that's been around with us for a long time. We first see this start to take shape here in America in the 1860s with a lady named Dorothea Dix. And she started out as a battlefield nurse in the Civil War. And afterwards, she began to travel around the country doing research on how veterans, Civil War veterans, and also people who were termed at that time mentally disabled, how they were treated. She found that a lot of people who had mental illness, developmental disabilities, ended up basically in one place, which was prisons, poorhouses, places that were run by the state. Their care basically was non-existent. And she started a movement. She began to travel around the United States, talking to different states legislatures, getting money. She was tireless in this. And she actually was the person who began the asylum concept here in America. And so again, that, we need to look at things that have happened in the past so that we don't do them in the future, hopefully. Anyway, one of the things that we are doing currently with NAMI is that we have an advocacy position here. And one of the reasons for that is that people that we deal with, each NAMI is different. They have a little bit of a different focus depending on where they are and what the needs of their community is. We here in NAMI Mahoning Valley, in Trumbull and Mahoning counties, we focus a lot on people who have severe mental illness. We had a state hospital here in this area, in Youngstown here, named Woodside, and it closed in 1995. And when it closed, a lot of people opened up group homes, adult care facilities on the north side of Youngstown. We had a lot of large, older homes there, and they opened up group homes. We had basically on the north side of Youngstown what is referred to as a mental health ghetto. We had at one time, I think, as many as 12 adult care facilities there, caring for over 160 people who had severe mental illness. So we have that need here in Youngstown, and that's one of the reasons that we focus on people who have a severe mental illness. Also looking back into the past a little bit, here in our country, one of the things that happened with people who had severe mental illness is up until the early 1950s, they were kept in institutions away from society, no treatments, basically. In early 50s, we began to experiment with psychoactive drugs. Thorazine was the first one. And over time, we began to see that people maybe could have a life outside of institutions when their acute symptoms were addressed. So the early 1960s came along, and JFK authored and got passed the Community Mental Health Act, which started community mental health centers, the concept of deinstitutionalization, in that we take people out of the institutions, take that money and fund case management, psychiatrists, housing. This kind of dovetailed right into the civil rights movement in the early 60s. And this was kind of kept alive in the memory, in the public's memory, in that in the 1970s, you had a number of large institution closings where there was quite a bit of abuse that was revealed, especially in some of the developmental centers. So then in the late 70s, there began to be a lot of unrest in our country. And in the 80s, the institutionalization continued at a slightly slower pace. And we as a country got into bed with the devil, in my opinion, in that we started HMOs, allowing insurance companies to dictate treatment and how long and so on. And you saw that stays in mental health units were getting shorter and shorter. And in the 90s, you began to see the first rumblings of the incredible growth of people with severe mental illness who are on the streets. And also in the late 90s, early 2000s, you began to see the population in prisons explode. Largest provider of mental health services in our country right now is Cook County in Chicago. Sheriff Tom Dart has over 5,000 people at any one time in his jail there that have severe mental illness. Second largest provider of mental health services in our country is in Dade County, Florida, the jail there. So here we are in 2020, back where Dorothea Dix started, with many of the people that have severe mental illness being in prison. So one of the things that we looked at was we have an excellent program here in Mahoning County where Compass, one of the mental health centers, they have individuals who go into the jail, see people, do work to hook them up with services afterward, and provide support while they're there. So we began to look at what kind of advocacy then are we providing for people in the community who have severe mental illness that has severely compromised their functioning, and therefore they live in group homes. As you know, severe mental illness impacts people and their families significantly, and a lot of times people who have very severe symptoms perhaps don't react to medication or don't respond to medication, end up living in group homes because of their severe symptoms. And so we began to look at people who obviously their ability to advocate for themselves is compromised. So what happens for them? What happens if they see someone at their mental health center and they have a complaint and they don't know where to go, they don't know how to do this? The process for filing complaints, for making your concern known, is actually very multi-layered and can be very complicated, and it a lot of times can be very intimidating. So we began to look at that concept, and we realized that there wasn't anybody out there, as far as we know, who is doing, at least in our area here, who is doing any kind of advocacy for people who have severe mental illness. Their complaints, to be honest, end up kind of swept under the rug or attributed to the fact that they have severe mental illness, or the fact that there just isn't anything out there to address that. Also, a lot of their concerns are just disregarded as, well, you live in a group home, that's the way it is. So we began to look at that very carefully. And also this kind of dovetailed with COVID. COVID started, we started in March and April doing a lot of connections with the adult care homes, the group homes, because they were having a lot of problems at that point in time, because they often have 35, 40 people in a group home and they buy in bulk. Well, that wasn't something that was happening in March and April. They were having severe shortages of food and toilet paper. So we stepped in and started helping out with that, gathering supplies that we could. Our mental health board here in Mahoning was very helpful with that. And we delivered a lot of personal protective equipment. We delivered a lot of food to the various group homes. And again, the concept came back to us of, how are the concerns of the people who live in the adult care facilities, how are they addressed? And so from that grew this kind of concept of, well, you know what, maybe we need an advocate to do that. Someone who has an understanding and is comfortable with people who have severe mental illness, dealing with some of the cognitive difficulties that come along with having severe mental illness, long term, to be able to work with people on an advocate basis. So we worked with the concept. We looked at various programs, various concepts that come out of Denmark, Sweden, looked at that whole idea of advocacy for people who have severe mental illness. And we kind of made some adjustments to the whole concept. And we now have come to the idea of um, we're not calling it an advocacy position, we are calling it a navigator. And one of the reasons that we chose to call it a navigator rather than an advocacy position is we did not want to come into the situation with a confrontational attitude, of course, but just the very fact of being an advocate sometimes evokes kind of a confrontational response, especially from perhaps group home situations. So we have kind of adjusted this idea to the idea of an advocate, or excuse me, the idea of a navigator. And the whole concept of a navigator is to help people negotiate the process of you have a complaint. How is this going to be voiced? How is this going to, you know, how is this going to be taken seriously? Many of the complaints are very minor and are not taken seriously. So how can we get this to a point where we have people who live in group homes, the residents there have an ability to voice concerns, have them taken seriously, and have them addressed on a regular basis. The other flip side of that is this navigator will also help with families. Families have an extreme difficulty navigating the system, especially people who have not had any experience with uh, mental illness. You know how that happens, that window between 17 and 25. A lot of times families are totally blindsided by very serious mental illness and have no idea how to navigate the system, have no idea what a pink slip is. They have no idea what HIPAA is. They have no idea why their adult child went to the ER feeling suicidal and then got placed somewhere else, maybe as far away as Windsor Laurelwood, which is 90 miles north. Um, well, we know, of course, that we have a shortage of beds, and if you are on a pink slip, then you are placed, you are hospitalized. And basically any place that we can find to hospitalize you. But there are a lot of parents that out there that don't have that knowledge of the system, and so we have again adapted that navigator position to provide support for parents who maybe are first time involvement in the system. Um, and then hopefully funnel them into one of our classes that we run. We run two different types of classes for parents. One of them is a longer term class that NAMI has been active with NAMI for many years. It's called Family to Family. And that is a class that is taught by family members. And the point being the sharing of their experience and their knowledge, as well as educating people about how the system works, how medications work, diagnosis, and so forth, to help people make sense of this very bewildering journey that has kind of like plopped itself into their lap. We also run a very much shortened form called Mental Health 101, and that is just a very basic, I think it's 4-hour class for family members, just hitting the very basics of some of the diagnoses, medications, some of the problems that come up, HIPAA, pink slips versus probates, hospitalization in general. So the idea of the navigator really fits in with our whole we feel our whole mission to provide support to both people who have a diagnosis as well as their families. We are lucky to have our support from both of our boards, our Trumbull County and Mahoney County board, who are providing some financial help for this position. So we're hoping here as we recover from COVID and go forth into a new lifestyle that this navigator position will be able to provide assistance for both families and people who have a diagnosis. Mhm. Any questions out there that I can answer about this?